I love Sam Peckinpah. I really do. I adore him as a filmmaker. I would say my top favorite filmmakers would probably be Stanley Kubrick, because I think he has one of the most flawless bodies of work. Akira Kurosawa. There's a few Russian directors I like. You know, you have to put Orson Welles up there. So it's hard for me to say Peckinpah would be my top five because he is so flawed. Orson Welles is flawed as a person and his filmography, but he's so innovative. With his flaws, you could still put him up there. And Peckinpah is he's similar to Orson Welles in that he's flawed as a person and as a filmmaker, and he clashes so much with authority that sometimes he can be his own worst enemy, and he's fighting these unnecessary battles at times. But man, when he puts it together, that motherfucker puts it together. And this is a movie that is fucking put together. I've seen this movie maybe twice, and I felt so ashamed of myself as I'm watching this. Why haven't you watched this movie more? It is so fucking good. One of the early scenes where he's like, if they move, kill them. What a fucking awesome line. To the end where he's just like, let's go. And I'm paraphrasing. Maybe I got a word or two off with these quotes, but talk about like saying a lot with a little.
Yes.
I feel like the movie kind of makes those short phrases powerful. You don't need a long, drawn out speech to get those goosebumps and the hairs on your back of your neck to stick out. Sometimes visually or just through the course of the movie, those things can have such powerful meaning. For him to say if they move, kill them, and then to follow it with one of the greatest shootouts in cinema history. It's like you're starting off the movie with this shootout. You don't know who anyone is, but through the course of the shootout, you learn about these characters. There's something between these two guys trying to kill each other in that they want to kill each other, but they also don't. They have a past.
Mm-hmm.
Seeing the personalities of these characters play out throughout the course of that shootout was just amazing to watch. And of course, ending it with that shootout at the end, that existential gunfight, after they killed the main bad guy, were they just going to let them leave? Because it seemed that way. You know what? We don't want to live. We just want to die and take as many of you motherfuckers with us as we can. I don't know, man. This movie is just so good. It just, I feel flustered because I literally just saw it. I'm just so giddy right now.
Wow.
I'm on cloud nine. This is easily one of the greatest movies I've ever seen. I knew that going into it, and I still feel like I underrated it. I would only say there's only, as far as buddy, gang, team, adventure, shootouts, action movies. People think of the Avengers and Suicide Squad, Guardians of the Galaxy, like, movies like that are kind of taking the throne of these type of westerns. But I would say the only movie I think is even on this level would be Seven Samurai.
Mm-hmm.
I would even put, I love The Dirty Dozen, but I think this is a step above that. This is one of the greatest action buddy movies you're ever going to watch. We should probably be more focused in discussing this. So I'll let you take the lead with the focus part, and I'm just going to try to gather my thoughts and jump back in here.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to start by saying a little bit about Peckinpah, Sam Peckinpah. He kind of started out writing a lot of Western scripts for TV, a lot of TV shows, TV Westerns. And he actually wrote a script for, I believe it was Gunsmoke, and they rejected it. So he wound up selling it to Zane Grey Theater, I believe. And then it got such a great reaction that they turned it into a series called The Rifleman. And that show went for several years. And then he created another series called The Westerner, which unfortunately didn't last. It only lasted about half a year. But the star of that show, Brian Keith, he was cast in a movie called The Deadly Companions. And and he suggested to the producers that they hire Sam Peckinpah to direct it, and that was a Western, of course, and that was Sam Peckinpah's first feature film, and it's kind of largely overlooked, but I actually quite like it. I think it's a good film, but he didn't have much control over it. He didn't write it in any way, and he wasn't allowed to kind of tamper with it. So he kind of swore he would never do that again unless he had full control. And so his second film was another Western, Ride the High Country, which is a great Western, and people certainly love it and think it's one of the great Westerns. And a lot of people would comment that he really grew enormously between the first one and the second one. And unfortunately, after that, he made a movie which didn't do so well, Major Dundee. He had a lot of problems with working with the studio and stuff like that. And
That was
and
the
then
Charlton Heston movie, right?
I think so.
Yeah. I actually
Yeah.
like that one. The Westerner got a lot of critical praise. It didn't catch on. And it
Yes.
got canceled, I think, a couple episodes in or something like that. Didn't even complete its first season. Ride the High Country is the movie that really got him on the map. That was a great movie. It really showed where a lot of his movies would go. It was kind of like the template for a lot of the movies that he would do moving forward. And he was really in
Yes.
love with men out of their time, especially in the context of a Western. And this kind of has that theme as well, where the automobile comes in and they're talking
Yes.
about the airplane and things like that. For whatever reason, maybe like his dad telling him stories or whatever it was, but that theme permeated throughout his filmography and as he would move forward. The early 1900s, that Texas Mexican border type area, and
Yes.
these cowboys that are entering this new world that they don't belong in. They're over the hill or they're about to be over the hill, and this new
Yes.
world is like taking shape and it's not for them.
Yes. Absolutely. Um, but unfortunately, he kind of his career almost ended because of Major Dundee, and then he was fired from The Cincinnati Kid. He was supposed to direct that movie, and he got fired, and so it was looking like not too good for him. But then he did a TV movie called Noon Wine, which I've never seen, but it was critically acclaimed, and he was nominated for awards. And I think that's what kind of gave him the opportunity to make another feature film, and that film was, of course, The Wild Bunch. And so thankfully he did get to do that. But I mean, I don't think Noon Wine is a Western, although I'm not 100% sure, but pretty much all these other films are Westerns. And so he's really kind of a specialist in the genre of Westerns. And Westerns, in my mind, they're one of the Western is kind of like one of the most basic genres. It's been around since the very beginning. I mean, it existed before film, but some of the earliest films ever made were Westerns, and it's always been around. It's been a hugely successful genre, and I think it's one of the most welcoming genres in that you can kind of do anything, any type of movie can kind of fit into the Western genre. You can do horror films that are Westerns, you can do comedies, you can do dramas, you can do just about everything that you can imagine. There can be a Western version of that. But I think that Peckinpah's Westerns tend to be what they call revisionist Westerns. Revisionist. And I think what that means is essentially the classic Western is more black and white. There's good guys, there's bad guys. It's morally very clear. But the revisionist Western, they're not quite so clear, who's good, who's bad. And I think that's definitely something that's going on in The Wild Bunch. Who of these characters are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? It's very interesting.
Yeah,
And
I would agree that this is more of a revisionist Western than anything else, but I think Revisionist Westerns kind of focused on a lot of these characters that were mythologized and turned into these icons. I think he does a little bit of that, but he's more so focused on time and when these things are happening as opposed to like how the stories are being told. It's more so about when these stories are being told. And it's about not the men, it's about the environment around the men changing. These men stay the same, but when the environment around you changes, then you can be the exact same person, but you're perceived completely different. How do you react to that? I agree, like it's definitely in that category, but I think within that category, you almost have a subcategory of what he focuses on. Ride the High Country was like more of an independent film that got him on the map. This guy's pretty good. Let's give him a budget. And then Major
Mhm.
Dundee was like, they gave him a budget. I'm not the biggest fan in the world of Charlton Heston. I like him more ironically because he overacts so fucking much. He really chews up the scenery, but he is really good to his directors.
Mhm.
He did the Orson Welles film where he played a Mexican, A Touch of Evil, and he
Yes.
really went to bat for Orson Welles. And he did that even more so with Major Dundee. I think he waived his salary because they were mad at Peckinpah for going over budget. The way the story goes is he told his agent, don't worry about it. They're never going to take my money. And then they took his money.
Wow.
He's like, listen, you could take my salary. Like, I really believe in this director. And he had no, as legend goes, he didn't think there was any way they would touch his salary, and they took his salary. I liked it. I remember I only saw it once, but I remember enjoying it a lot. But it was a major flop, and it was his first big budget movie. And I think that this was his next big opportunity, The Wild Bunch, and
Mhm.
he'd gone, I think, 3 years without directing any film at all before he got The Wild Bunch. It's a director for hire in a way. It's an odd way to start off with an auteur director that basically got his way with almost everything. This is like 100% a Peckinpah movie. And usually,
Oh yeah.
like, if it becomes your movie, it's because it's your script. They desperately want you, and it's your project from jump. This wasn't his project from jump. It was just serendipity. It was just the perfect script for this director, and he took a great script and elevated it. Take nothing away from the producer and the writer that started this project and brought him on board. He really elevated something that was already good and turned it into an all-time classic. This movie is great from beginning to end, be it the dialogue, which at times is sparse in a good way, the storytelling. There's not a huge amount to the story. And that's where I think the flashbacks really help in bringing context, who these guys are, why they are the way they are. Because a lot of what we're watching in real time, they're not very good characters. They're not very good people. These are despicable people. These are terrible
Mhm.
people. And I think a couple podcasts ago, I talked about the husband and wife duo, the Warrens,
Yes.
and
Yes.
I talked about like how they're despicable people in real life, and I didn't really like the depiction of them being looked at as heroes. But I think what Peckinpah did with this film is he's like in westerns typically you get these you'll get a group like the Wild Bunch, right? And they may start off like wild and crazy, but they got it's almost like the hooker with the heart of gold. They're like bandits with a heart of gold. When you think about what they did in this movie, you think about the end of it, right? What did they do?
Mhm.
They gave a bunch of guns to some rebels that are trying to save their village,
Mhm.
and they killed this terrible like dictator type bad guy, and they died going out on their swords. They
Mhm.
took as many of these terrible soldiers that have been terrorizing this town down as much of them as they could. The story's told at the end. These guys are heroes, but we know we're watching the movie. They're fucking scumbags. They're terrible
Yeah.
people. But he crafted this in such a way that made you love them. You love these
Mhm.
characters. But if he would have told this story, if you would have just heard the ending that I just explained, you'd think, it's kind of a sappy, typical story. But he took something that has a very typical ending, and when a very atypical way of getting to that end. And he made you love terrible people. But honestly, like I love these guys at the end, but the
Hmm.
journey there, it's like, man, these guys are fucking douchebags, shitbags, like terrible motherfuckers.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of what I was saying with the revisionist Western thing. It's like these guys aren't black and white. They're not heroes. They're not villains. I mean,
Oh, they're
you've got,
villains. They're
well, they're,
villains.
they're kind, yeah. As I say that, yes, they're kind of villains.